Deep within each of us lurks a truth that we often avoid recognizing. Failure, the very thing we desperately run from, is not really our enemy. On the contrary, it acts as a powerful ally on the path to self-discovery. And this is not just an attempt to comfort you by sugarcoating the harsh reality. Rejection hurts, burns like a flame, and can seem to tear us apart. But it is in this very moment that our consciousness awakens. Do you know why rejection hurts so much? The reason lies in the fact that it speaks not about the other person, but about ourselves. It exposes aspects of our personality that we have tried to hide, that we have not wanted to face. When we hear no, it does not mean that we are being rejected entirely. Rather, it is a signal that the other person is not accepting something they see in us. Perhaps it's something we ourselves don't want to recognize in ourselves. As Carl Jung once said, anything that irritates us in others can lead to a deeper understanding of ourselves. So ask yourself this question: what aspect of your personality is awakening this rejection? What inner shadow is coming into the light? What doubts and insecurities show up every time you feel rejected? Herein lies the mystery. Rejection is not random. It comes at precisely the moment when we need to awaken, when it is time for personal growth and evolution. It may well be that at this moment a recent episode of rejection comes to mind. The acute pain is re-experienced, and something inside feels like it is breaking. However, what if we assume that rejection is something positive that could have happened? Contrary to popular belief that rejection weakens, it can harden and make a personality unshakable. Let's imagine the situation. Every time one seeks outside approval, one becomes dependent and vulnerable, becoming a slave to other people's opinions that are out of one's control. At this point, what makes the personality attractive in its authenticity is lost. True attraction is born not from universal recognition, but from a mysterious self-sufficiency. By ceasing the desperate search for approval, the person begins to radiate a magnetic, irresistible power as those around him or her sense the lack of need for that approval. There is a dark side that few people want to face. The more one actively pursues someone in an attempt to gain acceptance, the more likely one is to face rejection. The reasons lie in the deep processes of the human psyche. The mind rejects manifestations of need. Sincerity of intentions and good goals do not matter if a person radiates despair, because this, in turn, causes rejection. Independence and equanimity are the true source of strength, but not because of insensitivity, but because of the realization of a fundamental truth. The individual is already self-sufficient. However, how does one achieve this cherished self-sufficiency? The answer is simple, but requires courage. One must accept one's shadow, that part of the personality that the individual despises, denies, and hides from view. Carl Jung called this process individuation, meaning the integration of all the disparate aspects of the personality into a whole. It is only through this path that a person is freed from the shackles of external evaluations, realizing that no one has the power to reject him except himself. It is worth thinking about how many times a person betrayed himself in the pursuit of approval that was never received. How many times has he tried to conform to other people's expectations, losing his unique self? Ultimately, paradoxically, a person can be rejected precisely for appearing insincere, for trying to appear to be something he is not, for striving for things that don't really matter. However, there is a truth that few people realize. Genuine attraction is not born out of manipulation or cheap psychological tricks. Rather, it is the result of the pure manifestation of a personality that has been able to conquer its inner contradictions and has ceased to depend on external evaluation. Such a person no longer needs the approval of others because he or she accepts himself or herself unconditionally. The world is full of people who seek to please others, seeking attention and desperately need the slightest manifestation of sympathy. But how do you stand out from this mass? The answer is simple. Stop looking, stop asking, choose your own path. Even if no one else shares your vision, even if it temporarily leads to loneliness. This is where the true power and secret of personal magnetism lies. Loneliness is not a sign of weakness, but a conscious choice that speaks of strength and courage. Those around you sense it, even if they can't always explain it. Genuine attraction comes not from cheap tricks, but from overcoming the need for approval. Rejection, contrary to popular belief, cannot break, but harden the spirit. Each failure, each rejection is a valuable chance to introspect and rethink your own motives. It is worth asking the question, why is the need for approval of others so acute? Why does the opinion of others, who often have no power even over their own lives, matter so much? Rejection acts as a wake-up call, forcing people to face the truth and recognize their own weaknesses. It is like a ruthless mirror, reflecting both flaws and hidden potential for growth. This is the paradoxical power of rejection. It does not sugarcoat reality, but honestly points out what still needs to be worked on. Instead of avoiding rejection, we should accept it as an inevitable part of life and use it as a stimulus for personal development. Every no is an opportunity to free yourself from dependence on other people's opinions and begin to build a healthy self-esteem based on your own values and beliefs. The road to emotional independence is not easy and thorny, but it is the only way to an authentic and fulfilling life. True attraction does not arise at the moment of becoming a reflection of someone else's desires, but when an individual reveals his or her true nature. True freedom and power lie in liberation from the shackles of external evaluation. One should be guided by personal principles, even if others do not share them. It is the unwavering authenticity, emotional independence, and mystery of a person who can be alone with himself, not because of loneliness, but because of the realization of his own value that ultimately attracts. Recognizing this fact strips rejection of its power, allowing the individual to regain control of his or her life. It is important to remember that rejection is the starting point for unlocking one's true potential. And here is where the most interesting aspect comes in. In the pursuit of external recognition, a person overlooks the most painful rejection of all, the rejection of self. How often does he neglect his true desires in order to conform to imposed standards? It is worth thinking about the fact that the most painful rejection does not come from others, but lurks in everyday decisions, dictated by the fear of being an outcast, to remain in the shadows. This kind of self-denial is particularly dangerous because it is quiet, subtle, and, most importantly, voluntary. The real tragedy lies not in someone else's rejection, but in daily self-denial, when the inner voice proves to be stricter, more ruthless, and merciless than any external criticism. This is the root of the problem, the inability to put oneself first. C.G. Jung emphasized that as long as a person is not aware of his shadow, it will secretly rule his life. The shadow is not an adversary, but the part of the personality that desperately needs attention, acceptance, and reconciliation. By carefully analyzing one's behavior, one can discover clear patterns: failed love affairs, recurring troubles, and cyclical conflicts. These recurring scenarios are a reflection of internal, unresolved issues that need to be recognized and worked through. Recurring events and intrusive thoughts are not an accident, but a manifestation of the so-called shadow seeking to make itself known. Each such repetition should be seen as a message that one persistently ignores, as an inner call that one prefers to drown out. The question arises, what happens if, instead of fighting this rejection, one stops and listens to it? How will life change if we begin to face what is scary to discover in ourselves? This is where Jungian psychology comes in, stating that in order to become a whole person, one must face one's own inner chaos, insecurities, and deep-seated fears. As long as one continues to ignore them, one will look to the outside world for what one can never find, because the outside is only a distorted reflection of the inside. What is sought is not in other people, but is buried inside, in those dark corners of consciousness where one is afraid to look, considering them dangerous. And indeed, these corners are dangerous, but only by facing this darkness, one can reveal the true potential of one's personality. It is there, in the depths of oneself, that one can find an understanding of who one really is. The amazing paradox of human nature is that the more desperate an individual is to protect himself from possible rejection by others, the more he rejects himself. And here it is, the bitter truth, which many people prefer not to notice. A huge number of people live their lives without knowing their real selves, without revealing their inner world. They hide behind numerous layers of protective masks, erected out of fear of discovering something they don't like about themselves. However, it is this strategy of self-preservation and prevents them from becoming truly attractive and interesting personalities. They turn into copies, into pale imitations, into empty vessels, trying to please everyone. Constantly manipulating and adjusting to other people's expectations, they lose their individuality, dissolving into this absurd game that ultimately destroys their essence. And herein lies the most difficult truth to accept. Only when a person finds the courage to face his dark sides, when he accepts and welcomes his shadow self, does he begin to live without fear of external rejection. He realizes that the most destructive and painful rejection is that which comes from within himself. And once this inner barrier is overcome, no external rejection can truly hurt him. This is what true equanimity and inner freedom is all about. We are not talking about indifference or detachment, but about a completely different quality, a deep realization of one's own importance, independent of external evaluations. Inner independence has a special magnetism because it is quite rare and is a true manifestation of personality. While most people seek the approval of others, only a few are able to recognize their own value. By achieving this inner harmony, a person inadvertently stands out from the crowd, as others only reflect their own insecurity. It is worth thinking about those people who cause sincere admiration and seem to possess an inexplicable charm. What unites them? As a rule, these are individuals who put their own beliefs above other people's opinions, courageously face their own shortcomings, and choose to live by their own rules rather than according to imposed expectations. It is in this act of personal courage that their appeal lies. They don't need recognition, they just exist. And that's why they attract attention effortlessly. Thus, so-called reverse psychology is not a ploy or manipulation, but a natural manifestation of a person who fully accepts themselves as they are. It is not a question of inducing a pursuit of self, but of stopping the inner race. And it is this profound equanimity that turns people into real magnets for others. The paradox of the situation is delightful. The less a person needs approval, the more he gets it, and the less he strives for something, the more he attracts it to himself. What is the secret to this magic? By giving up the pursuit of recognition, a person opens himself to the natural flow of life, becoming a person whose value is determined not by external factors, but by a deep inner connection with himself. And when one realizes that rejection only hurts when one rejects oneself, something amazing happens. The world begins to take an interest in one, discovering something unique and authentic in one that is increasingly rare in today's world. It is like looking for a key from the outside when it was always in your pocket. Now it is worth imagining what would happen if a person made the decision to choose himself, leaving behind fears, expectations, and imposed stereotypes, and looked at his reflection in the mirror unadorned, without seeking approval from anyone but himself. The author is convinced that each person is waiting for an amazing discovery. Behind the mask of denial and a veil of fear hides the true self, patiently waiting for the moment when it is recognized and accepted. It is necessary to heed the advice. Do not waste precious time seeking recognition and approval from those who are far from self-approval. Rejection should be seen as a clear signal, a call to awaken and find inner strength. When the acute need for external approval disappears, something miraculous happens. A person begins to attract to himself exactly what he needs. Perhaps there comes a moment when a person is ready to ask himself the most important question of all. What would he do if he knew for sure that he no longer needed anyone's approval? What kind of life would he choose in that case? The author leaves the main secret for last. Once a person has overcome the fear of rejection, he or she never returns to the previous state. In the depths of human nature, a certain transformation takes place, marking the moment of truth. In this moment of realization comes an understanding that has matured stealthily. To achieve inner harmony and completeness does not require the presence of anyone from the outside. The point is that man is initially self-sufficient. He only needs to awaken this dormant truth in his consciousness. Rejection, contrary to popular belief, is not a final verdict, putting an end to further prospects. On the contrary, it is a unique chance granted by fate, which can be used for personal growth and self-improvement. The only question is whether the individual will be able to accept and benefit from this challenge, or whether he or she will prefer to remain passively waiting for someone else to take responsibility for his or her life and decisions. Rejection opens the door not only to deep introspection, but also becomes a severe test of strength, a test of authenticity that not everyone can withstand. There is another bitter truth that many people try to avoid. In a situation of rejection, a person is hurt not so much by the opinion of another person, but by its coincidence with their own thoughts and beliefs about themselves. The greatest pain is caused not by external criticism pointing out imperfections, but by the internal agreement with this criticism rooted in the subconscious. The fear of facing one's own insecurities reflected in the mirror of others' eyes becomes the main obstacle to healing. It is there, deep inside, that there is an open wound that requires attention and care, which must be healed in order to gain wholeness and self-confidence. This is when the real miracle is born. Rejection, like a faithful companion, points out the areas that need to be worked on diligently. Each experience of rejection becomes a map of sorts, pinpointing the exact location of the soul wound that needs healing. Many people prefer to hide their weaknesses, deny their existence, or deceive themselves, because facing the truth is always painful. But this escape only prolongs the suffering. Do you aspire to the power that only a few achieve? Then boldly face your greatest fears. Don't run away or turn away. Embrace the dark side of your personality that no one suspects but that you know well, alone with yourself in silence. And here we have a fascinating paradox before us. We live in an age obsessed with ostentatious perfection, where rejection is carefully hidden and disguised in the guise of success. Social media is overflowing with smiling masks, cleverly applied filters, and elaborate poses designed to hide the deep insecurity behind these carefully retouched images. Have you ever thought about the consequences of openly displaying your emotional scars instead of hiding them deep down? What happens if you muster up the courage to show the world your history of defeats, fears, and doubts, but emphasize the unwavering desire to move forward no matter what? This is the paradox. The more a person tries to hide their vulnerability, the more fake they appear to others. People have an unmistakable sense of insincerity, and they are impressed not by flawlessness but by unconcealed authenticity, by the courage to show their wounds, scars, and lessons learned. Therefore, it is worthwhile to stop hiding the facts of rejection, as if it were a stigma, and start using them as a symbol of courage. It is in recognizing one's weaknesses that great strength lies. It is important to understand that it is not about romanticizing failure or indulging in the role of victim, but about becoming a conscious warrior. And herein lies the hidden power. When a person recognizes the possibility of being rejected and realizes that this will not destroy his personality, his emotional level automatically rises. The reason lies in the realization of the most important life lesson. Self-esteem should not depend on external approval. Emotional dependence inevitably leads to failure. It is important to realize that it is not about withdrawing from the world and turning into an emotional hermit. On the contrary, you must learn to interact with others based on inner strength, not needing approval, but striving for genuine communication. Have you ever noticed that the sincerest and deepest relationships occur when you stop desperately seeking them? It's a universal law that few people realize. When you stop chasing, you start attracting. But don't confuse this with passivity. It's about living a life filled with passion and purpose, where there is no time or space to worry about external approval. It's about discovering your essence so fully that rejection has no place in your reality. Rejection certainly exists, but its influence disappears because you no longer empower it, no longer allow it to define your identity. Let's imagine for a moment that all doors are opened before a person. Every aspiration is realized, every cherished wish is fulfilled, and every person you meet is ready to say a cherished yes. What is ahead of him? Most likely, he will face a feeling of all-consuming emptiness, because nothing from the outside can completely fill the inner world. This clearly demonstrates that true fulfillment has its origins not in external factors, but in the depths of one's own self. The true completeness of the individual lies not in another person or a distant place, but in personal inner recognition. At this point, a dangerous illusion arises. If the source of all that is necessary is within, why does one continue to look for confirmation of one's worth from the outside? The reason lies in fear, in the fear of realizing that absolutely everything depends solely on himself. It is much easier to lay the blame for failures on external rejection. It is more convenient to point to circumstances than to recognize personal responsibility for one's own self-realization. However, it is in this fear that the key to gaining true power lies. The realization that emotional salvation is a task that each person must solve on his or her own marks an important stage of personal growth. One stops looking in the outside world for what one can only find within oneself. This is the key secret of the depth psychology of overcoming feelings of rejection. When one comes to realize that one does not need external approval to feel the fullness of life, Then one begins to attract worthy people and opportunities into one's life. The attraction comes not out of desperate need, but out of conscious choice. This fundamental shift in thinking changes life dramatically. The individual stops living with his hand outstretched, begging for recognition. He begins to move forward with confidence, autonomy, and inner strength, knowing that his worth is not dependent on other people's opinions. It is important to understand one truth that is rarely voiced openly. Life favors those who dare to be themselves without striving to conform to conventional standards. Paradoxically, society both criticizes and rewards those who ignore its unspoken rules. The allure comes not from those who crave recognition, but from those who are indifferent to external praise. Therein lies the true power and magnetism of personality. Rejection should be seen as an indication that one is still searching for something that can only be found in the depths of one's own self. Will one accept this challenge? Do we have the courage to face our fears and see rejection as the greatest gift of destiny? After all, there is only one irreparable rejection: the refusal to live a life without choosing oneself. This powerful conclusion leads to the realization that rejection is only the beginning of the journey of self-discovery. Even after comprehending the workings of the mind and the ulterior motives behind rejection, there remains something more to be discovered. It is a mystery that each individual must unravel on his or her own. No one can point to it from the outside.